The Melting Pot. Hosted by Dominic Monkhouse.
Hello and welcome to the Melting Pot podcast. Today I'm talking to Alex Kjerulf. It's Danish and it's difficult to say. Alex is the Chief Happiness Officer at an organisation called Woohoo. And he's on a mission to make us all work in happier workplaces or be happier at work. Author of a number of books. He's got a TEDx talk which is fantastic and I'll put in the show notes. His book that came out a few years ago, Happy Hour is 9 to 5. Controversially, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the interview, he thinks it's our responsibility to ensure that we're happy at work, not just our employers. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the lessons from his new book, Leading with Happiness. And he's got some great advice for managers who want to manage and to increase happiness at work. So here's Alex.
My name is Alexander Kjerulf, and I'm the Chief Happiness Officer of a company called Woohoo. We're based in Copenhagen, Denmark, and we make people happy at work. We just celebrated our 15th company anniversary. We've been around for 15 years, and we make people happy at work. We travel the world, and we teach companies how to become happier workplaces where people actually like to work.
Alex, that's fantastic. How do you measure that?
How you measure happiness?
Yeah.
Well, there are two fundamental ways you can do that. One of them is the survey, right? You could do a happiness at work survey, and you can get your staff to take that survey, and that'll teach you something about how happy they are, and that's a pretty good way to do it. And the other way is, of course, if you're a manager of an organization, you should know. You should be in touch enough with your employees that you actually know how the hell they feel about their jobs. Maybe not, second to second or minute to minute, but at least, on an overall basis. If you're, a manager worth your salt, a leader, a CEO worth your paycheck, you should know how people are doing. You should be in touch enough with your organization that you can actually tell if people are happy at work or if every single person there hates their life, their job, and you as a person.
What model do you use in terms of return on investment, or I suppose return on happiness? How do you think about the financial implications of getting this right or wrong?
Well, there is zero doubt from the research that happy companies make more money, and this has been shown in so many studies. So we know that when an organization is happy, we know that productivity is higher. Happy employees do more work in the same amount of time. We know that happy employees are more creative and innovative. So if a company needs to constantly reinvent itself, it can much better do that when employees are happy. We know that in happy organizations, absenteeism is lower, which can save you a ton of money. We know that employee turnover is lower. This is not exactly a mystery, right? If people like their jobs, they will stay longer in that workplace. And right now there is a real war for talent going on. So many workplaces around the world are telling me that it's getting harder and harder to find qualified people and to hold on to the qualified people they have. So for these reasons and many, many more, we know for a fact that happy companies make more money. And I think that's why companies around the world are so interested in this topic right now.
And the people that you talk to, the companies you talk to, are struggling to attract and retain talent. By their very nature, I guess they are happy companies or companies who want to be happy. So your sample isn't those at the other end of the spectrum where it's miserable.
That's very true. There are absolutely horrible, toxic workplaces out there that would never even consider hiring us because their worldview is not based on happiness at all, almost based on the opposite, right? I'm being perfectly serious here. I have heard business leaders say that if their staff is happy, they're not working hard enough. For so many people, their model of success in business is based on suffering. And the harder you work and the more you suffer and the more you sacrifice the rest of your life for your career, that's their model, the more successful you will be. That model is, of course, completely wrong. It actually turns out that people who are happy at work are on average more successful in business. But for so many people and for so many companies, happiness is just not part of their worldview, and that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to make companies realize that it's not, as a business, it's not like you have to choose between a good bottom line and a happy workplace. Quite the contrary. In fact, if you have a happy workplace, it'll be good for the bottom line.
And do you draw a distinction between happiness and engagement? Have you picked happiness because it's an emotive word, whereas engagement feels a bit like satisfaction, or?
That depends on what definition of engagement you look at, and there are several. If you look at, I think the most popular is probably Gallup's definition of engagement, and if you look at theirs, it's very very closely related to happiness, because it is about how people feel about their jobs. It's their emotional experience of being engaged in the work they do. So I actually think that in many ways, the way they define it is very similar to how we talk about happiness. I would say the main distinction we make is between happiness and satisfaction, because satisfaction at work, or job satisfaction, or employee satisfaction, is very rational. It's a very logical thing, right? You sit down and you evaluate all your job circumstances, and you rationally, logically decide if you're satisfied or not. And it turns out that's a very poor measure, and doesn't correlate well with ultimately with business success. So we say job satisfaction is what you think about your job, while happiness at work is what you feel about your job. On a daily basis, how does work make you feel? Not second to second. It's not like you could be happy at work every second of every day. That would be weird, right? But just this, do you spend most of your days at work feeling pretty good? Like, I like the work I do. I'm appreciated for it. My work is meaningful. I like the people I work with, and I come home most days feeling like today was a good day. That's what we're talking about here. It's what you feel about your job.
The question I have for you is I know when we've spoken in the past, one of the things you said is that it's not just the employer's job. The employee also has some skin in the game. It's your responsibility to be happy at work. That, on the face of it, seems a little odd. Perhaps you could explain a bit more about that to me.
Sure. I believe that fundamentally, each and every one of us is responsible for our own life, right? I mean, who can be responsible for your life except you? And I think the same goes for your work life. Ultimately, you are responsible for your own happiness in life and your own happiness at work. This is not, of course, there are many things that influence your happiness in life and your happiness at work. But ultimately, the responsibility for doing something about it if you are not happy at work is yours. So the way we look at it in the workplace is that, of course, managers and bosses and CEOs have a huge responsibility for creating good workplaces where it's easy to be happy. And as a manager, as a leader, you can definitely do that. You can also do the opposite, right? You can create horrible, toxic cultures where it's almost impossible to be happy. But within that framework, within the whatever structure is created by leadership in the company, it's still up to each and every one of us to do what we can to create a better workplace. So I often get the question, who's responsible for happiness at work? Is it the leaders or the employees? And the answer is yes. It's both, right? Leaders cannot do it alone. Employees cannot do it alone. The workplace, the culture is something each and every one of us creates together. And the cool thing here is that there are so many things we can all do. Of course, if you're the CEO, you have, as you've done in your organization, you have wider degrees of freedom. You have more budget, you have more freedom, there are more things you can do. And therefore, I think you have a greater responsibility. It's like they said in the Spider-Man movie, right? With great power comes great responsibility. But even as a perfectly regular employee, there are so many things you can do to make yourself and the people you work with happier. And that's why we see it as a shared responsibility, and that ultimately, if I'm an employee somewhere, my happiness at work is my responsibility. And for instance, if I find myself in a workplace where I cannot be happy in this workplace, it is ultimately my responsibility to quit and find a new job where I can be happy. Nobody else can do that for me. That is a responsibility I have to shoulder for myself. It's an easy trap to fall into, to say, I hate my job, my boss is a jerk, my coworkers are mean, the work I do is boring or stressful. woe is me, I'm powerless, I can't do anything. But you can do something. And I'm not saying this is easy. None of this is easy. Quitting a job is not easy. It is one of the hardest decisions you can make in your lifetime. But sometimes it's just necessary, and nobody can make that decision for you except you. And that's why again, each of us must take responsibility for our own lives instead of just waiting and falling into that role of victimhood. Woe is me, poor me, I'm powerless, I can't do anything. It's everybody else's fault that I'm suffering.
Alex, what model do you have? Where does it start? Can you start by putting in a pool table and free snacks, or do we go to the other end and we have to be a purpose-led business? Can you start anywhere on that spectrum?
No.
Do you have a preference?
Yes. I would say that all of that highly visible stuff that many organizations focus on is nearly pointless. All of the foosball tables and the dartboards and that all of that stuff, perks and all that is pointless, because that's not what makes people happy at work. I think that creates a lot of satisfaction, but very, very little happiness if you look at the research. And I see so many companies trying it. I think that's one of the things that frustrates me the most, is seeing these organizations that genuinely want to be good workplaces, but the way they try to do it is, let's put a gym in the office and that will make our employees happy, or let's give them free fruit, or let's give them free coffee, or whatever. And all those things are nice. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's in my opinion, it's very nearly a waste of time and money. So what you got to do, this is our model. Happiness at work comes from results and relationships. That's what you got to give your people. And by results, we mean this feeling that they're good at their jobs and that the work they do is meaningful. It's actually making a positive difference for someone somewhere, be that the clients or the customers or the society or environment or the economy or even their coworkers or whatever. But just this feeling that I'm good at what I do and what I do matters for somebody. That's results. And then relationships is this feeling that you are valued as a person, not just as a worker, not just as a resource, but you're actually valued in the workplace as a human being. And you have good relationships with your coworkers, with your boss, maybe even with the clients or the customers or whatever. But just this feeling that I belong in the workplace. And I think research very convincingly shows that it's not the only thing that matters for our happiness at work, but they're two main things that matter. And if you have a workplace with every single perk you can imagine, but you don't give people results and relationships, I can guarantee you they're going to be miserable.
It's funny, isn't it? I go into organizations a lot, and there are two things people never complain about. The employees never say, man, I get so much praise here. It's almost embarrassing. I am overpraised, and nobody has ever said to me, the thing with management, if they just stop communicating, they're just telling me what's going on all the time. And so, that fits well with your model there, that whole, am I doing a good job? And am I getting feedback? Are we making a difference? Am I making a difference?
Yes. Positive feedback is a really interesting thing in this regard. And I always tell companies, if you could only do one thing, there are many things you can do to create a happier workplace, but if you could only do one thing, I would say start with positive feedback, praise and recognition. Because first of all, it's very rare. It's very rare in most workplaces. In fact, a lot of people complain about the opposite, what you said, I never get any positive feedback no matter how good of a job I do. And secondly, it's incredibly powerful for making people happy at work because it creates both results and relationships. If you praise me for the good work I've done, it shows me that I've made a difference, I've contributed value, gives me that feeling of results. But I think what's even more powerful is it shows that you've seen me. You've seen my positive qualities. You've seen something good in me. And you care enough about me to actually tell me about it. And that's very, very powerful for creating relationships. So for those reasons, I think positive feedback is the most powerful thing you can do to create a happier workplace.
Well, I think actually, isn't the Gallup question in the Gallup Q12, it's did you receive praise in the last 7 days?
Yes.
I've actually seen organizations change that to 6 months.
That's so sad.
because they were scoring so poorly
Wow.
Or they just didn't have a culture of praise. And you think, well, wow, it doesn't cost anything.
No. That's the thing about positive feedback, is that it takes no time, it costs no money. It does take a bit of an effort, because you have to actually see people, right? And you have to know them well enough that you can actually, and know their work well enough that you can actually give them meaningful positive feedback. Not just, you're awesome, but here's what I saw you do that was really good, or that I really appreciated, or that really made a difference for the company or for this customer or whatever. Yeah, it's the saddest thing ever that so few companies do it well.
How do you feel about the concept of a purpose-led organization?
I love it, and I think all companies should be purpose-led. More than anything else, a company needs a vision that is inspiring, that is positive, and that is about something bigger than the organization itself. Because what that does is that as an employee working in this organization, you know that you're working towards a positive vision. You know that you're working to create a positive change in the world. Of course, a lot of organizations don't really have a positive vision. They have goals. So like, our goal is to increase revenues by 1.8% in this fiscal quarter. That's a fine and noble goal. But is that inspiring? Does anybody get up in the morning excited about creating fiscal growth of 1.8%? No, hell no. People get up excited about, creating a better world or improving the environment or whatever. And that's what a company must have. I saw a great example. We have a partner company in Serbia, an IT company called Vega IT Sourcing, started by two men called Sasha and Vladan. They're awesome. 135 employees. And their company vision is, we want to create a happy and successful company so we can use its success and power to create a better world. Isn't that amazing?
It is. And how do they define anything like that? Do they have any?
Yeah, they've done a lot of cool things. So for instance, they worked so hard so they work in IT, and they've done a lot of cool things to sort of stimulate the entire IT and tech ecosystem in Serbia. They've done conferences and events. They do all these seminars and meetings. They've sponsored education, IT education for young people. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is also improving the city they're in. They're in Novi Sad, which is the second biggest city in Serbia. So they've done tons of charity events, charity runs to help different noble causes in their city, which I think is amazing. And all of that, means that as an employee of Vega, you can work there with pride, because you know that you're not just padding the bottom line, you're actually helping create a better and happier world. And I think that's just fantastic.
Look, you see loads of companies all over the world. What's another cool example?
My favorite example of a company with a positive vision is Patagonia. You know Patagonia, right? They're about improving the environment. They believe that we're living in a time of environmental disaster, and they want to do something about that. And this permeates every aspect of how they do business. So they will only hire employees who are passionate about the environment. As an employee of Patagonia, you can take time off to go work for an environmental charity. Every year, they donate 1% of revenue or 10% of profits, whichever is larger, to environmental charities chosen by the employees. And somebody told me recently that they are now redesigning all of their stores to be not just Patagonia stores, but also environmental activity centers. So if you're an environmental organization and you need a place to meet and organize, you can do it in Patagonia stores. I mean, how cool is that, right? So every single aspect of their business is not about improving their bottom line. It's about improving the environment. This also influences their production. So for instance, they spearheaded the production of organic cotton, which nobody was making before. And now a lot of farmers are, because they demand it for their products. So that's an example of a company that really lives this on every level of their business.
Yes, and I've seen them doing repairs and selling second-hand gear, not because it impacts their bottom line, but because it reduces their impact on the environment.
Yeah, for Black Friday a few years ago, the biggest shopping day in the US, they actually had a full-page ad in the New York Times with a picture of a Patagonia jacket and then a text that said, "Don't buy this jacket." And then there was a long manifesto basically about how overconsumption is ruining the environment, encouraging people to repair an old jacket, buy a used jacket, get an old jacket from a friend, And only if you can't do any of those things should you buy this jacket.
What's the happiest company you spent time with?
Oh man, that is so hard to say, right? Because I visited a ton of happy companies. I've been to Google.
Because the people you don't mention will then be upset that they're not your happiest.
that too. And the thing is, they're happy in very different ways. So I went to Google, very happy organization, and there's a lot of tech people, so they're happy in one way. I went to a really happy organization is Zappos. I've been to their headquarters in Vegas, 5 times, and it's one of those. You walk into the office and you can just feel that this is a good place. I talked to one of their employees and she said, every morning I drive into work, I park my car in the parking lot, and then I can just, now I can relax. That's how she put it, right? There's a bank in Denmark called, and I'm not kidding, it's called the Middelfart Bank. Because there is in fact a town in Denmark called Middelfart. It means middle of the travels, middle of your trip. And this is a fairly small bank, about 300 employees. I visited them a couple of times to study how they became so happy. And this is just, again, a place where people love to work, but a very different atmosphere compared in this bank, in a financial institution, compared to an online retailer like Zappos. So these are all examples of very, very happy workplaces, but each in their own way. And that's what's so cool about it.
Because of the CEO down?
I would say in what unites a lot of really happy workplaces, I would say all happy workplaces, is that they have top leadership who believes in happiness and take happiness seriously. Because if top leadership doesn't do that, if they're not ready to make happiness one of their top strategic priorities, it's only a matter of time before they'll start making decisions that, let's say, improve the bottom line, while at the same time hurting happiness at work, right? Only if you have leadership, really committed leadership that strongly believes that happiness at work is the way forward, only then will this be sustainable over any period of time. And I think you see in some workplaces, maybe even many workplaces, you see top leadership paying lip service to the idea of happiness at work. You may see in their values that we value our employees, or employees are our number one asset, or whatever. But then that's what they say, and then when you look at what they do, they are consistently prioritizing short-term profits over employee happiness, which is really stupid, because when you hurt employee happiness, you're hurting your bottom line down the road. A good example of the opposite is Quicken Loans in Detroit. We visited their headquarters in Detroit a couple of years ago. They have 20,000 employees. They do mortgage loans. And their CEO, Dan Gilbert, he said, numbers and money follow, they don't lead.
I was just going to ask you about that. What are the sort of leading indicators? You said earlier that if you're any manager worth his salt will know whether his employees are happy, and there should be some more positive praise. What are the daily behaviors or weekly behaviors? What are the habits that great organizations get into, do you think?
A lot of this, and I think this is really interesting. This is a really interesting question, because I think it's about many small regular behaviors rather than just a few rare big ones. Okay, so you may say, we want to have a happy organization, let's have a huge summer party next summer. And that's fine, that's a great idea, but that's one party one day out of the year. What do you do the rest of the year? Right? So I think a lot of this is about figuring out, what does this look like on a day-to-day basis, and how do we create that feeling of results from relationships on a day-to-day basis. And some of it is ridiculously banal, like praise and recognition. You can do that every day. You could do that multiple times a day. A really stupid one that we sometimes have to teach our clients is say good morning. Do you actually, when you come into work in the morning, do people actually say good morning and acknowledge each other's existence, or do people just come in, sit down, and start working? So a lot of this, again, it's not going to look the same between all organizations, but a lot of this is stunningly banal. And it is about, how do we create that feeling of results in relationships? Do we help each other? Are we there for each other? If somebody is struggling, do we actually notice and help that person? Very, very simple one is a random acts of workplace kindness. Are we nice to each other in the workplace? So a lot of this can really be boiled down to simple daily behaviors that create this feeling that we do great work and we actually value each other's company in the workplace.
If somebody's looking at, listening to this podcast and thinking, that sounds great, how do I, what resources have you got? I know you've written a couple of books. Where should people go and look at the material that you've produced?
3 words, read my book. I'm kidding. No, there's definitely our books, and I wrote Happy Hour is 9 to 5 back in 2006, and that sort of goes over the basics of happiness at work and what it is and what makes us happy at work and results in relationships and all of that. And then last year, my latest book came out, and it's called Leading with Happiness. So this is very much about what an organization can do and what managers can do. But in addition to that, the place to start is probably our blog, which is at positivesharing.com. And there are literally hundreds, there are actually now thousands of articles on there on happiness at work, and great videos and links and exercises and tools that people can look at. We give a lot of that stuff away. We just want as many people, as many employees, as many managers, and as many companies as possible to do something about it, which is why we give so much of our materials away, and you'll find all of that on the blog. There's also a newsletter that people can sign up for on the blog, which is also free, that we send out once a month with tons of tips and ideas.
What's your motivation for this mission that you're on? Why did you become the Chief Happiness Officer?
Yeah, well, I came out of the tech industry myself, so we're kind of similar backgrounds. And when I left it 15 years ago, I sort of asked myself, what is my true passion in life? And while IT and tech is awesome and a really fun field, I realized that my true passion is happiness at work. And I think for me, it comes out of, it comes out of personal experience, both having tried jobs I loved and having tried jobs I absolutely hated. It came out of that, and also from seeing other people, from seeing what happened to friends and family when they were in jobs they hated, and how that can wear a person down. And I think it came out of seeing that. The thing is, I think the main thing that drives me is this. We live in a world where work is not optional. You must work. Unless you're born to billionaire parents, you'll have to work. And you'll actually, not only will you have to work, you'll have to spend most of your waking hours at work. And given that this is the way the world is, I think we owe people good work. I think we owe people work they can actually enjoy, that will build them up and not break them down. Work that will actually, that they will want to do, where they will wake up most mornings excited to go to work. And work that, makes their lives better, richer, more interesting, more fun. I think we owe people that, and I think we owe them to definitely not do the opposite and create workplaces that are ruining people's lives, because that is the true cost of a bad workplace. It's not financial, it's measured in human lives, because we know that being unhappy at work can it can ruin people's careers, it can ruin their health, it can ruin their private lives, can ruin their relationships. It can ultimately kill people. We know that people who hate their jobs have increased mortality rates from strokes and heart disease and cancer, just to mention a few. So I think that is what drives me, just this very idea that how we feel at work has such a huge effect on us, not just at work, but also in the rest of our lives. And I think we owe people good jobs.
2 things. One is, other than your books, is there another book you would recommend people read?
Oh, there are tons.
Oh, go on. Give me a few then. Give me a few. If picking one is too hard, give me a few.
Yes. I have a real weakness for case stories, because at the end of the day, I'm a practical man. I like to see how people have done this in real life. And some of my favorite case stories, I'm just going to mention 3. I mentioned Zappos. And the CEO of Zappos is a man called Tony Hsieh, and he wrote a book called Delivering Happiness. Have you read it?
I have.
Isn't that book amazing?
It's a fantastic story. And then going all the way through and then saying, okay, well, we've created an amazing workplace. Now we've moved the office to a different location. Now let's make the location of our new office an amazing place as well. Inspiring.
Yes, and very practical and very. I love that book. It's a great book, great story. Another one that I really like is by Robert Chapman, and the book is called Everybody Matters. Have you read that?
No, I don't think I have.
That book, it's phenomenal. And what I love about that is that it's his personal journey, because he was raised, educated as a hardcore businessman. So he had, a business degree, and he learned, that what matters in business is profits and making money, and that was it. And then at one point, he sort of has this near spiritual awakening, where he realizes that there are actually more important things than that, and that everybody matters, hence the title of the book. And so he took his company, which is called Barry Wehmiller, industrial company with 14,000 employees around the world, and made it a human workplace where people love to work. And the book describes how he does it. This is, with factory workers, blue-collar workers, so a very different workplace compared to Zappos, which is more customer service and online retail. And the third book I'll mention, which is one of my absolute favorites, because it shows how far you can take this idea. That is The 7-Day Weekend by Ricardo Semler. Have you read that?
Yes, I've read that, and also I read his first book, Maverick, and I think that might have been one of the first business books I read. And
me too.
So I suppose probably set me on this entire journey.
Me too. It was one of those books where you go, oh my God, this is possible. This is so awesome. You can do it.
The story from there that still sticks with me is that he got a requisition for more filing cabinets, and then they decided that in fact they probably stored loads of stuff they didn't need, so they threw a load out, sold a load secondhand rather than actually buy any. And I remember going into the office the next day and clearing out. I think I got rid of all of the files and all of the filing cabinets, and then my secretary asked me what her job was if it wasn't to file stuff. And I said, well, we'd have to work that out, because I was never looking in these filing cabinets ever again, and we were throwing them away. So it's that sort of light bulb moment. I thought it was a fantastic book, or both books are fantastic.
And that's what I admire about you, right? Because you do this stuff. You're not just thinking as a leader. You're not just thinking this is nice, we should do this. You've actually done a lot of so many cool things in your companies that also inspired us, which I think is fantastic. And at the end of the day, that is the key. Happiness at work is something we do. And if you want a happy workplace, it's not about values. It's not about missions. It's not about, policies. It's about how do we act? How do we treat each other on a day-to-day basis? It's about action, and it's not about, values. It's how do we treat each other?
I've got one last question, which is, if you went back to the beginning and you could do it all again, what would you do differently?
That's a great question. And I think that what I would have to do differently is maybe sharpen the message even more. Maybe not be, quite so eager to be liked, and quite so eager to sound reasonable and fair and so on. Maybe to go out there and be more of a firebrand and say, listen, treating employees badly is ethically wrong, and you should not be allowed to do it. This is not just a question of HR policies. This is a matter of life or death for a lot of people, depending on how we treat them. Working in an organization is going to affect people's lives to a very, very high degree. And we owe them good treatment. We owe them to treat them in a way that makes their lives better overall. That's very much the message that came out of my last book, Leading with Happiness, where I actually make the point that the way many organizations is run, that actually breaks people down, it's morally wrong. I don't really want to use the word evil, but it kind of is. That's what I would have liked to arrive at that sooner, and not be afraid to phrase the message quite that provocatively maybe.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Alex, for taking the time to talk to me today.
My absolute pleasure.
It's been fantastic. I hope to see you soon.
You got it.
The Melting Pot was hosted by Dominic Monkhouse, and you can find out more about Dom on LinkedIn. Just search for Dominic Monkhouse or his companies, Foundry Media or Foundry 51.